For more than 180 years, Michigan's railroads have played a major role in the economic development of the state. From its beginning in the 1830s, Michigan's railroad system increased to a high of more than 9,000 route miles by the early 1900s. Included in this number is an important train stop for the Grand Rapids, Indiana, and Detroit Company, also including the Lansing and Northern Railroad Company. The former Howard City train depot now sits quietly alongside the White Pine Trail, the former railroad tracks, and next to Reynolds Township Library on Howard City's north end.
Before that, the very first railroad was built in Michigan from Toledo up to Adrian in Lenawee County, and this was actually the first railroad in west of the Allegheny Mountains in the United States, so it was kind of a brand new concept, and it was originally horse-drawn. They had horses that they had. I've seen drawings of it. They had kind of what you would think of as a stagecoach, and they put it on railroad wheels. And they continued. When these railroads started, they were strap railroads, and what that meant is now you're used to a railroad that has steel rails, that weigh 130 pounds a yard. But in these old days, they weren't really rails. They laid down locomotives were originally powered by wood. A train going from Detroit to Kalamazoo in the early days would stop, and farmers would sell a load of wood to the railroad, and they would load it on the engines, and that's where the firemen would put wood in the boiler to make it work. In the 1860s, that was changed to coal, but for the first 30 years, it was wood, and a lot of the logging in the lower part of Michigan, Lansing and south, a lot of that wood was harvested not just for houses, but for wood to heat the locomotive boilers and to heat homes. There was no coal here. There was no gas or anything like that. It was all. So they made improvements in cars and locomotives and comfort. The very first Pullman passenger cars were built in Detroit before Pullman moved that to Chicago, and so there were a lot of firsts in Michigan as they developed the railroad system. The peak of railroad building in Michigan was about 1916, and then they started to slowly abandon lines. Well, I don't know the exact answer to that, but it's got to be enormous. When you think about, so let's say a lot of people came to Michigan on steamboats from Buffalo, New York. They came on Lake Erie, and they ended up in a port either Toledo or Monroe or Detroit, even north of there. But pioneers came to Michigan on steamboats, most of them, because there weren't any roads. There weren't any roads from New York to Detroit, really. I'm sure there were some paths and stuff. And when they got to Michigan in the 1830s, there really weren't any roads in Michigan. If you look at some of the towns in Michigan, the very, very early towns, they were on the Great Lakes, or sometimes were on a river. Like Grand Rapids was an early town. And how do you get to Grand Rapids? In the very early days, you went all the way around Lake Michigan, and you took the Grand River, and you paddled up to Grand Rapids. So that's how people got around until the railroads were built. Once the railroads were built, things really expanded rapidly, because it brought not only passengers and freight to these Michigan, you came to Detroit. Let's say you went to a town, let's say Mason, Michigan.